The first officer on scene would later say the house was too quiet. It was just after 1:30 a.m. when police cruisers rolled into the pristine suburban neighborhood of Frederick, Colorado. Christmas lights still glowed softly along rooftops. Lawns were trimmed. Minivans slept peacefully in driveways. It was the kind of place where neighbors borrowed sugar and kids rode bikes until sunset. But inside the Watts family home, something was wrong. The front door wasn't forced. No shattered glass. No blood on the porch. Just an eerie stillness hanging in the air like a held breath. Shanann Watts was gone. Her phone was found wedged between couch cushions. Her purse sat on the kitchen counter. Her car was still in the garage. Her medications remained untouched. And most chilling of all, her two little girls, 4-year-old Bella and 3-year-old Celeste, were nowhere to be found. Within hours, the case exploded. Friends reported Shanann missing after she failed to show up for a doctor's appointment. She was 15 weeks pregnant. Her husband, Chris Watts, claimed he had left for work early that morning, kissing his sleeping wife goodbye. When he returned home later and couldn't find her or the children, he panicked. By afternoon, news vans lined the street. Chris stood in front of cameras, hands tucked awkwardly into his pockets, swaying slightly as he spoke. His voice was soft, controlled, measured. "I just want them back," he said. "If they're out there, just come home." He looked like every devastated husband America had seen before. Clean-cut, polite, a devoted father. Co-workers described him as quiet and dependable. Neighbors called him friendly. On social media, he appeared in countless videos smiling beside Shanann, helping with the girls, laughing during family vacations. The perfect family man. But detectives noticed something the public didn't. No tears. No trembling voice. No urgency in his eyes. Just a strange detachment, like a man describing someone else's nightmare. By day 2, investigators were inside the house with forensic teams. There were no signs of struggle. Bedsheets were stripped from the master bedroom. Shanann's wedding ring was found on a nightstand. The girls' blankets were missing. A neighbor named Nate offered up his home surveillance footage. Chris agreed to watch it with officers. The grainy video showed Chris backing his truck into the driveway in the early morning darkness, something Nate said he had never done before. Usually, Chris parked on the street. On camera, detectives observed him closely. Chris folded his arms, shifted his weight, spoke too quickly, laughed nervously at the wrong moments. "That's weird," he muttered, pointing at his own movements on screen. "I was loading tools." But there were no tools visible, just shadows, and a man walking back and forth between his garage and the truck bed. The FBI joined the case within days. Missing pregnant mother. 2 small children. National media coverage. The pressure was immense. Then came the first crack in the perfect image. Phone records revealed Chris had been having an affair with a coworker. Her name was Nicole Kessinger. Their relationship had grown intense over the summer. Text messages showed discussions about starting a new life together. About being free. About firsts. First son, first experiences, first everything. Investigators learned Chris had been searching online for lyrics to songs about betrayal and violent relationships. He had looked up vacation spots, apartments, the cost of wedding rings. Meanwhile, Shanann's friends painted a different picture. She had sensed distance in her husband. She confided that he seemed cold, withdrawn. But she believed they were working through it. On August 13th, the morning Shanann disappeared, she had returned home from a business trip around 2 a.m. Security footage from a friend's doorbell camera confirmed she walked inside alive. She never walked out. Cadaver dogs alerted inside the house. Not strongly enough for a confirmed scene of violence, but enough to raise alarms. Then investigators discovered something else. Chris had visited a remote oil site owned by his company early that morning, alone. A location called Survey 319. He claimed it was a routine work check. But GPS data from his truck showed he had been there for nearly 2 hours. 2 hours. In the middle of a frantic search for his missing family. The ground at the site was dry and cracked under the August sun. Massive oil tanks stood like silent sentinels over empty fields. If someone wanted privacy, isolation, and time, this was the place. Police obtained a warrant. As they prepared to search the oil site, Chris agreed to take a polygraph test. He failed. When confronted, he shifted his story. He claimed Shanann had killed the girls in a fit of rage after he told her he wanted a separation. He said he snapped, that he strangled her in anger. It was the first time he admitted she was dead. Detectives didn't believe him. Not because men don't snap. Not because relationships don't implode. But because nothing about Chris's behavior matched a crime of sudden passion. It felt planned, calculated, cold. Search teams arrived at the oil site. They scanned the barren land. And then they found disturbed earth. Shallow. Recently dug. When they opened the grave, they found Shanann's body, wrapped in a bedsheet from the master bedroom. But Bella and Celeste were still missing. Investigators turned toward the towering oil tanks. Each hatch was sealed with a heavy metal lid. When they climbed up and looked inside, what they found would horrify even seasoned detectives. The girls had been placed inside separate oil tanks, disposed of like waste. The image of the grieving husband begging for his family's return replayed across every news station in America, now transformed into something monstrous. The perfect family man. The devoted father. The calm, soft-spoken husband. He had driven his children to their deaths. And as detectives pieced together the timeline, one terrifying realization emerged. This wasn't a crime of rage. It was a decision, plan, a new life waiting on the other side. But the most chilling detail wasn't where the bodies were found. It was what investigators uncovered next, a set of text messages sent just hours before Shanann returned home. Messages that suggested Chris had already decided his family wouldn't be alive by morning. And when detectives read the final deleted draft recovered from his phone, everything changed. The deleted draft wasn't long. It wasn't a manifesto. It wasn't a goodbye letter. It was colder than that. If anything happens to me, investigate my wife. That message, written days before Shanann disappeared, sent a chill through the investigative team. It wasn't sent to police. It wasn't posted online. It was saved quietly like an insurance policy. Detectives stared at it in silence. Why would a man who claimed he loved his wife, who insisted he was blindsided by her supposed violence, preemptively try to cast suspicion on her? It felt less like fear, and more like preparation. By now, Chris Watts had officially confessed to killing Shanann, but only after accusing her of murdering their daughters first. It was a story he clung to in the interrogation room, shoulders slumped, voice flat, as if rehearsing lines from a script that didn't quite fit. But the evidence was beginning to tell its own story. The autopsy reports dismantled his version of events. There were no defensive wounds on Shanann and consistent with attacking two children. No signs of a chaotic struggle inside the house. The girls had not fought violently for their lives. Instead, the medical examiner's findings suggested something chillingly intimate. Smothering. One child may have regained consciousness before the final act. That detail would haunt everyone who read the report. Investigators retraced the timeline of August 13th with microscopic precision. Shanann arrived home at 1:48 a.m. By 2 a.m., her phone showed activity consistent with normal use. Then, around 2:30 a.m., it went silent forever. Chris's phone data showed he was awake. He had searched for sports scores, checked the weather. Ordinary digital footprints on a night that would become anything but ordinary. At 5:27 a.m., his truck ignition turned on. Security footage showed him backing into the driveway, loading something, walking back and forth repeatedly. At one point, his body briefly disappeared behind the truck, and a small shadow moved near his feet. Investigators now believed that shadow was one of his daughters. Alive. He later admitted that after killing Shanann in their bedroom, straddling her while she begged for her life, he wrapped her body in a sheet and loaded her into the truck. Bella and Celeste were still alive when he placed them in the back seat beside their mother's corpse. The drive to the oil site took nearly an hour. An hour of silence. An hour where he could have turned around. An hour where two little girls sat in the back seat, confused, likely terrified, asking questions no father should ever have to answer. According to his later prison confession, Bella asked him, "Daddy, what are you doing?" That sentence would become one of the most disturbing elements of the entire case. At the oil field, under the pale early morning light, Chris buried Shanann in a shallow grave. Then, one by one, he carried his daughters up the metal stairs to the oil tanks. Investigators struggled to understand the psychological leap required for that level of detachment. This wasn't rage. This wasn't self-defense. This was methodical. Back at headquarters, detectives began dismantling his claim about Shanann killing the children. There was no forensic evidence supporting it. No history of violence from her. No witness statements suggesting instability. In fact, friends described her as fiercely devoted to her daughters. Financial records revealed mounting pressure in the Watts household. Bankruptcy filings. Credit card debt. Mortgage strain. On social media, however, the family looked perfect. Vacations, smiling selfies, motivational posts about marriage and motherhood. Behind closed doors, the reality was unraveling. Chris had begun transforming physically months earlier. Losing weight, working out obsessively. Co-workers noticed a new confidence. A shift in personality. He wasn't just having an affair. He was reinventing himself. Nicole Kessinger, the co-worker he was seeing, told investigators she believed Chris was separated. That he was nearly divorced. She said he spoke calmly about his children but never mentioned a pregnant wife. When she saw news reports about Shanann's disappearance, she panicked. Phone records showed she had searched online for phrases like, "Can police trace text messages?" and "How long do phone companies keep records?" She cooperated with investigators, turning over messages and admitting the relationship. But detectives saw no evidence she knew about the murders in advance. The motive, they concluded, was terrifyingly simple. Freedom. Chris wanted a clean slate. No debt. No obligations. No children. No pregnant wife. A fresh start with a new partner, unburdened by the life he had built. But reality doesn't erase itself that easily. As media coverage intensified, public perception shifted violently. The soft-spoken husband from the porch interview was now viewed through a different lens. Every sway of his body, every half-smile, every oddly calm plea replayed endlessly online. Body language experts dissected his movements. Former friends expressed disbelief. His parents struggled publicly with denial. Then came the jailhouse interviews. In a shocking turn, Chris abandoned the story about Shanann killing the girls. He admitted he had smothered them at home once before, believing they were dead, only to have them wake up again. He claimed he was angry and didn't feel anything. The lack of emotion disturbed even veteran investigators. But one question remained unanswered. If this was about starting a new life, why not divorce? Why annihilate the entire family? That's when analysts uncovered something even darker. Weeks before the murders, Chris had calculated the cost of separation, child support for 3 children, including a newborn, alimony, division of assets. The financial burden would follow him for decades. Killing them eliminated the obligation. It was cold math. As prosecutors prepared formal charges, 3 counts of first-degree murder and unlawful termination of a pregnancy, they believed they had a clear narrative. A man driven by ego, resentment, and desire for freedom. But just as the case seemed airtight, one final detail surfaced that rattled the prosecution team. In the final hours before Shanann returned from her business trip, Chris had contacted a realtor about selling the house. Not listing it in the future. Not discussing possibilities. He asked how quickly it could be sold. And when detectives pulled his browser history from the night before the murders, they discovered he had searched for something that suggested he had made his decision long before anyone realized. How to prepare for a polygraph. That wasn't panic. That was premeditation. And as the court date approached, prosecutors prepared to reveal the full timeline, one that would prove this wasn't a crime committed in the heat of the moment. It was a plan built quietly over weeks. But what Chris would say in open court would shock even the investigators who thought they already knew everything.